When it comes to tabletop RPGs, the right soundscape can immerse your players in a world beyond just the table that they're sitting at. So let's talk about some soundtrack stuff. Welcome back, fellow Game Masters, to the Daily D20. I'm Richard Quiner, and today, in Tabletop Thursday, we're talking about sounds and how we can use that in our games to elevate them and immerse the players more in our fantasy worlds. When it comes to soundtracks, there's a lot of different assets you can use in your game, a couple being music, ambience, and different sound effects. Music is just like in movies and video games. It's something that's there to help us feel the mood of the situation and get more invested in what's happening on the screen in front of us, or in tabletop role-playing games, to help us get invested in the game and the scenario that's playing out with the players. Ambient sound is not music, but it does serve a similar purpose, where it is to get us into the game and get us invested in the scenario. When I say ambience, I'm thinking more of the atmosphere of the game. If the players are in a tavern, does it sound like they're in a tavern? If they're in a city street, does it sound like they're in a city street? These sort of ambient sounds are able to elevate the game and immerse the players without being too overbearing in terms of music. And the last thing that comes to play with soundtracks is the sound effects. Now, sound effects I define as the individual sounds of an action or something that is happening, perhaps a spell sound or a horse sound or something that is very specific for just that brief moment and then it's gone. As Dungeon Masters and Game Masters, we do want to immerse our players in our game world, and the music and the sounds of that world can help us do that. But there are some tips and some ideas that we need to follow so we don't distract the players from the game. The first tip I would say is don't overpower the table. Keep the volume of your music and your ambience very low so the players don't have to yell to be heard. So they can hear you talking, they can hear the other players talking, and that way they can stay in the game and they're not distracted by the sounds being too loud. You do want to pick music and ambience for the scene or for the scenario you're in. If you're going into a battle, you want to have battle music. You don't need to have party music when you're about to fight a big boss. So just be mindful of the music you're playing. Sometimes just putting on a soundtrack in the background or some audio in the back just to, add a little, background filler noise like we sometimes do doesn't help the mood of the game. So it is something you need to be mindful of. What is happening in the game? What music and what sound effects are you going to use in that moment? Another don't I would say is don't try to force the game to follow the music. Another don't I would say is don't try to force the game to follow the music. If you find yourself listening to music while you're planning a session and you find a song or something that's going to work well for a scene, maybe keep that in mind, but don't try to railroad the players into that moment. Let them get there organically, let them find that moment, and then you can use the music. Sometimes DMs, we do fall in this habit where we create something and we really want the players to experience because we know and we think it's going to be amazing, but then what we end up doing is railroading the story, and it's not the player's story at that point. That's when we are making them play our story, when as Game Masters and Dungeon Masters, our job is to tell the player's story. So don't plan your game around your music, but let the game inform the music choices that you'll make at the table. And the last don't I will say for all Game Masters is don't get too caught up in the sound and the music and the ambience of your game that you are distracted from running the game and having a good time with your players. We're going to go over a couple tools that are going to help in this, but there is a very real risk for Game Masters to get so caught up in trying to make the perfect soundtrack at the table that it slows down the story and the players get distracted and pulls everyone out of the game. So keep that in mind as well. Don't get too absorbed in the soundtrack. So let's talk about a couple tools for soundtracks and use in your tabletop role-playing games. One that is very popular, probably the most popular that I've heard of, is called Soundscapes. And all these tools, I will link them in the description of this video, but Soundscapes is a huge tool. It was touted by very popular streams as a great tool for managing the soundtrack of your game. But here's what I found out about this. As I tried to use it, I found myself more distracted by all the options. It's almost like there's too much. And that's great if you're of the mindset that you're going to prepare and you're going to set different presets for each and every scene and every possibility that you may run into. But for me, I don't like to plan too much ahead because I don't know what the players are going to do, and I like to be improvisational at my games. Soundscape just doesn't work for my play style at this point in time. The other thing with Soundscape is you can get the app and download it for free and have limited use of some of its sounds, but if you want any good stuff, like the better, higher quality, more memorable, immersive sounds, you have to pay for that, which is perfectly fine. I'm not saying that as a complaint, because they are a company, they have to make their money, they provide these sounds, they do a service, and they sell that to you. But if you do go the route of Syrinscape, just be aware of that you'll have limited use until you buy the sound packs. The other quick side note about that is they do have science fiction and fantasy and kind of random Syrinscape versions, so it can kind of fit with any of your RPG games that you want. One other thing I will say about Syrinscape is it would work really well for streams, and I think that's why it is touted by streams and popularized by them, because if you're having a stream and you have a dedicated tech person, someone there who can run the app for you, so the GM doesn't have to pay attention and try to choose their sounds while the players are making their choices, just having someone off screen running the sound would be fantastic, and it would be very immersive for the players. But at our home games, we don't always have that, which is why it doesn't work for me. Now, the other end of that is a very simple, easy to use app that I actually prefer, but I'll tell you why I don't actually use it anymore. But it's called D&Dify. D&Dify. And again, link will be in the description. But what it is an Android application that connects to your Spotify Premium account. Once you're connected to that, it is basically a soundboard of different ambient sounds, different battle music, different sentiment music that you might want in your game, all at your fingertips with a push of a button. It plays some very high quality music because it feeds through Spotify Premium and pulls the music that is there. That's the reason I'm not using it, is because I didn't want to keep having my Spotify Premium account. I have my YouTube Music, that's what I use for music. I don't need Spotify Premium. But between D&Dify and Syrinscape, for me and my playstyle, D&Dify works 100% better. It's more intuitive, it's much simpler, easier to manage, and it's still good quality and very satisfying for me to hit that boss battle button and not have to worry about the volume and the other sound effects coming into play. There is actually a YouTube channel that I found that is amazing, and I think these guys do fantastic work, or girls, I don't know who they are. But these people do amazing work, and it's called Sword Coast Soundscapes, and that will also be linked in the description. Basically, all they do is create ambient sounds for different locations in the Dungeons & Dragons worlds, which also works for Pathfinder. They're just ambient sounds that you can use just by going on YouTube. Usually they're about 3 hours long music tracks. Not music, I'll say ambient sounds. So there's no music, it's just audio, it's just atmosphere. I don't even remember how many actual tracks they had, but I do remember there was a lot. I didn't count last time, but I feel like they're well over 100. The great thing with the Sword Coast Soundscapes is they are very high quality. They're really good sounds that you can use. The downside is it's on YouTube, so it would be a little laggy at a game table and be pretty difficult to run quickly. But it's there, it's an option, and it's something to think about. And the last I wanted to mention there are other options out there. These are just a few of the tools that I've used, that I've tried. There are other options out there. One is a VLC player. You're able to make a pretty quick, simple soundboard with that if you choose to do so. I'm still working on that for my own stuff by creating a playlist and filling it with the right sounds you want and making sure they're labeled clearly so you can just push the button. There are other soundboard apps online for both Windows and Mac. So you have a lot of options of things you can download and get a hold of to create your own soundscape and your own tool to use that will work for you. Like I said, soundtracks can be a great tool for increasing the immersion of your game if you do them right. I highly recommend all Dungeon Masters try this. Try to bring the sound in and start early. Don't wait until you're good at being a Dungeon Master to start using sounds. The earlier you can start using the soundtracks in your games, I think the more fun you'll have running the games for your players. That has been Soundtracks on today's Tabletop Thursday. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, hit the subscribe button. I'm Richard Quiner. Thank you for watching.